on in the world. And we know that definitely the war in the Ukraine is still going on. As a matter of fact, I think we had our first war trial conviction. So that is going on. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And of course, we've got Chris Greco with us, as well as the big boss, Nick Palvita, and all of that. So we'll have some conversations around things going on in the world and all along those lines. Steve said he may join us today, but if not today, he'll definitely be here on it tomorrow and all of that. But definitely having a lot of things going on in the world. And one of them is the president. And that's right. Mr. Biden has said earlier today that he would be willing to use force to defend Taiwan, capping a series of critical comments about China while in Asia that an aide said represented no change in U.S. policy toward the self-ruled island. Biden's remarks made during his first visit to Japan since taking office and as Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida looked on appeared to be a departure from existing U.S. policy of so-called strategic ambiguity on Taiwan. China considers the democratic island its territory under its one China policy and says it is the most sensitive and important issue in its relationship with Washington. When a reporter asked Biden during a joint news conference with the Japanese leader if the United States would defend Taiwan if it were attacked, the president answered yes. That's the commitment we made, he said. We agree with a one China policy. We've signed onto it and all the intended agreements made from there. But the idea that it can be taken by force, just taken by force, is just not appropriate. Biden said it was his expectation that such an event would not happen or be attempted. A White House official later said there was no change in policy toward Taiwan. China expressed its strong dissatisfaction with and resolution opposition to the remarks, according to a spokesman for its foreign ministry. Taiwan's foreign ministry thanked Biden for his support. So that is some of what's going on as Biden is over there in the whole Asian theater and all along those lines. So I'm going to bring up a man that knows a lot about international politics and things of that nature, that being none other than Chris Greco, and see what Chris has got to say about this toughness that apparently is being attempted by none other than the president, Mr. Biden, and all along those lines. I'm sure that Steve may have some thoughts about this as one that came from that whole military background and all along those lines. I know that in past shows, we've talked about the maybe lack of toughness from Mr. Biden in certain parts of the world and the international political spectrum and all of that. But, you know, he's, I guess, trying to be tough, whereas he maybe wasn't tough enough with Mr. Putin. So James Brown, an associate professor at Temple University, Japan, said they're seeking to toughen their policy, but without necessarily provoking China. So what is your thoughts about this? What would you be thinking if you were China and they're saying, hey, you know, that island is off to the side? No, you can't touch that. We can't touch that. They're independent and all of that. So what is your thoughts? They might say the same thing with our relationship, even though it's a whole different country and all of that, with our relationship with both Cuba and Bermuda, which are actually off of our coast and all of that. But what is your thoughts about what he is saying, and what do you think the Chinese's reaction will be?
Well, Bermuda, if I'm not mistaken, is still owned by Britain, I think.
I believe it is. I think you're right.
Yeah, Bahamas. Now, Bahamas are independent. They originally were British, and now they're independent. So Bahamas are independent, which is interesting, actually. I mean, that's an interesting one to bring up. But the Taiwan situation. So let's go back in history and say, okay, how did this all happen, right? So you had Chiang Kai-shek, who was basically the president premier of China, whatever you want to call it, mainland China. He was basically in charge, right? And in fact, when we fought World War II, the pilots went over to China and fought against the Japanese on Chinese territory against the Japanese as kind of mercenaries with Chiang Kai-shek. So then after the war was over, Mao Zedong, who was a fervent enemy of the Japanese, all of a sudden they were at peace, and he said, Chiang Kai-shek, Mao Zedong was very much a Marxist, had learned a lot of Marxist theology or philosophy. So they decided, okay, we're gonna start revolution. So they started the revolution. Then after that was all finished, Chiang Kai-shek went over to Taiwan and basically stayed over there. So there was Democratic Republic of China, and then the People's Republic of China, and then there was the Democratic Republic of China. So it's kind of separate from that standpoint in Taiwan. So now all of a sudden we said, okay, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to support Taiwan because that's, democratically, it's a democratic nation. This is what we're all about. So we're going to support that. And the Chinese said, no, that's a breakaway rogue, what they call a rogue state. And we're sooner or later going to take that. We're going to absorb that, much like Crimea, much like, Lugansk, much like all that stuff, except it's not just like right across the border. They're going to have to go, island to island type aspect to try to get this thing back. Well, they're already in the South China Sea putting, literally building islands to try to get closer and closer to Taiwan and control that South China Sea area. So I would say that, President Biden is, it's funny because he misspeaks a lot, right? And the press kind of lets him go on that. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Trump misspeaks. In fact, he said at one point in time that he was going to recognize Taiwan, and everyone went crazy. Now, all of a sudden, Biden says something, well, that we've never changed our policy on Taiwan. Well, I would hope not, because if the Chinese take Taiwan, that's a big deal for them because that island is strategically located. So they can now put their airfields in Taiwan. And now we're talking about, hop, skip, and a jump to get wherever they need to go. So this is a problem militarily and politically and diplomatically that they're trying to really hedge their bets on this whole situation with China. And he went over there and said, we're going to support Taiwan no matter what. So that's going to be an issue that's going to be until the Chinese decide they're going to take Taiwan. And it's interesting because I think the Chinese would, if they given a choice of invading the United States and being able to do so, the Chinese would take that over invading Taiwan. They would rather go to the root cause of this whole thing and invade, let U.S. implode and then invade it, rather than sit back and say we're going to invade Taiwan. Screw it. We'll just take the big Kahuna over in the U.S. Take that, and then Taiwan will surrender because now they have no more support. Which is actually true. They probably would concede a lot to mainland China if the U.S. would ever fall in that area. So I'd say, and in fact, it's funny because they're teaching that now. My daughter is a U.S. Air Force major reservist, and she's taking courses Air Command and Staff College, and they're teaching that stuff. How is the Pacific going to be able to do this and command control when you got this? Mark, in Europe, you got like country, right? In the Pacific, you got Pacific, and then you got country, and we're located in Hawaii, which is a long way to China and a long way. And then we got things in Japan, which is a shorter way. And we got stuff in Korea, which is a shorter way. But the main headquarters is sitting there in Hawaii, which is like, literally in the middle of the Pacific.
Wow.
So it's interesting to see how that all is going to pan out and what's going to happen. But as you can see, the PR, step back on that. He wasn't really saying that we would support military, that we would go in there and support them. He's saying that the policy hasn't changed, and we agree.
Speaking of PR, and you got to love PR from other people and everything. Apparently, our good buddy, and yes, I'm being sarcastic, Mr. Putin is trying some PR stunts as well because he was joking that he is, about being blamed for all the world's woes. His words, not mine, but definitely sure. Russian President Vladimir Putin quipped on Monday, so that was earlier today, that he would have a serious talk to the West about its assertions that he was to blame for all the economic chaos sown by the conflict in the Ukraine and the West crippling sanctions. So we do know that there's been a lot of death over there. It's killed thousands and displaced 14 million people, while the West attempt to isolate Russia as punishment, and Moscow's blockade of grain shipment from Ukraine's Black Sea ports have sent the price of oil, natural gas, grains, cooking oil, and fertilizers soaring. And at a televised meeting in the Black Sea resort of Sochi, Putin told Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko that Russia's economy was doing well despite the Western sanctions. Lukashenko said the sanctions had given both countries the impetus to focus on self-development and that the elites of the West were deluded about the causes of their economic woes. on the economy, thanks are really due to them in the West. If they have given us such a push to our own development, Lukashenko told Putin, who smiled and nodded. What is happening over there is that they really underestimated by reading their own media. They got inflation, yet the truth is Putin is to blame. Putin is to blame for everything, Lukashenko said. Putin pursed his lips and nodded. We will have a serious talk to them, Putin said with a forced smile. Lukashenko chuckled and said yes. So, like I said, they're trying their own PR campaigns and all of that. So, what are your thoughts about this attempt by Mr. Putin to say, hey, wait a minute, we're having a war and all of that. And yes, I know it's impacting the world economy and all of that, but, there's other things going on as well. And that's not the only reason that y'all are having your problems and all along those lines. So I guess he's trying to deflect, I believe is the term that I've heard some people use and all of that. So it looks like he's trying a deflection technique. What is your thoughts about this deflection technique?
Well, it's the old, don't pay attention to this hand, magician. This is the one that's pay attention to this hand over here. It's the old, bait and switch thing. And leaders, Soviet leaders have been doing that for decades, if not millennia. Their whole idea is that this is a rich country and look at us, and Russians have invented this and that. I'll tell you the thing that scares me is more than anything else is climate change. And a lot of people sit there and say, Chris, you believe in climate change? I say, absolutely, I believe in climate change. I'll tell you why. Siberia has had a 90 degree shift, right? And it has gotten warmer by 90 degrees. Now it hasn't gotten to 90 degrees, but basically it's like minus 40 and it's now 50 degrees, right? So it's starting to melt. If the tundra melts, and that tundra is extremely rich soil, that means the Russians could increase their wheat production, especially winter wheat. They could actually plant winter wheat in Siberia. If they did that, that would increase their crops like 1,000-fold. All of a sudden, they would be the breadbasket of the world. Now all of a sudden, they can start feeding the world. And you talk about baby formula. A major portion of baby formula is grain. So all of a sudden now you're sitting back going, oh, we're going to do barley and all this stuff. And all of a sudden now, where are we getting our baby food? Well, that'd be Russia. And let's take a look at something else. Let's take a look at fuel. True. Russia only has whatever it was, 4% or 5%. Do you realize how we get our goods? We get our goods in the United States by truck. Do you know what fuels trucks? Diesel fuel. Diesel fuel has already hit $7. I think it was $6 or $7. They think it's going to go up to $10 by the end of the summer.
No, I'm talking about a friend in California, and they said it was $6 already in California just for regular gas. So
right.
I can imagine what diesel is.
So it's crazy. So Russia and Belarus, you got to remember now, Belarus, and we're leaving all these other states. They're kind of sitting back. Turkestan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, all these different stans are out there, right? And what's happening is that they side absolutely with Russia. We haven't heard anything from them. Uzbekistan is a major source of oil and minerals.
I hear what you're saying, Chris,
it's
but
scary, man.
Speaking of which, Chris, I want to bring in, and I saw that he had popped in as well, so hopefully he'll be ready and everything. But I want to bring in Sasha very shortly because I know that Sasha has probably got some new news coming from that part of the world as well and all of that. So I'm going to try to bring Sasha in very shortly. But as I get ready to bring Sasha in and we talk more about what's going on there and everything, it does look like the first Russian soldier on trial for war crimes in Ukraine has been sentenced to life in prison for killing a civilian. So this man was 21 years old, Army Sergeant Vadim Shishimirin. He pleaded guilty last week to fatally shooting an unarmed Ukrainian man in the earliest days of the war. And on Monday, a panel of judges in Kiev found him guilty of violation of the laws and customs of war connected with premeditated murder and sentenced him to life. Prosecutor General Iriana Venediktova actually wrote that on Facebook. So social media has actually been even talking about what's going on in that sense as well. And the quote from Judge Seryoff Agavanov, according to Reuters, is that given the crime committed is a crime against peace, security, humanity, and the international legal order, the court does not see the possibility of imposing a shorter sentence of imprisonment on Shishamarin for a certain period. And apparently this incident took place back in February in Shapakovka, a village in the Sumy region, about 180 miles east of Kiev. So the victim was 62 years old and died on the spot from the gunshot wound that was inflicted by this particular soldier and all of that. So it looks like we've got our first military conviction and all along those lines. And I know that there are some people that are probably hoping that Mr. Putin will get his chance in court as well if he's not actually assassinated or something along those lines. But what are your thoughts about looks like our first war crime trial and our first conviction? So I was wondering your thoughts and everything. And like I said, I think Sasha might be busy with some other stuff, but hopefully in a minute he'll come up and we'll have his comments around what's going on as well and all of that. But what is your take on this war crime trial? And it looks like our first one. And like I said, the man is 21 years old. I want to say that they are conscripted in the military, if I remember correctly, about Russia and everything. So it looks like because of Putin's orders, his life is he will be spent in the rest of his life in prison and all of that, unless they do some sort of appeals or something along those lines. I don't know how that works in military court, having never served in the military, definitely not in the military of another country. So definitely, how does that work? And what are your thoughts about what I just said?
Well, I tell you, and Sasha, I know will probably disagree with this, and that's okay. Is that, and I'm not in Ukraine. I'm not getting shot at. So I just cannot relate to this from a standpoint of war aspects. But when you're in war, you're a prisoner of war. When you're a prisoner of war, you're allotted a certain amount of, I guess, not benefits, but a degree of humanity. You never put a prisoner of war up for war crimes trials. You just don't do that. It just doesn't work that way. And the Ukrainians, I think, are trying to send a message. They're trying to say, look, you've come into our country uninvited. You have killed our citizens. We are going to make an example out of this soldier, and hopefully they don't shoot him. If they execute the guy, I think they're starting escalation that is going to hurt both countries for the rest of our lives and the rest of our grandkids' lives and the rest of our great grandkids' lives and great nephews and every nieces. It's done. So hopefully they won't shoot this guy. If they put him in life in prison, that means that they always have the chance of doing a prisoner exchange, which is good. That's probably what they'll do. And but I think they're trying to just send a message like, hey, you cannot come in here and shoot our 62-year-old people or anybody for that matter who's a non-combatant. And if you do so, we're going to put you on trial. And that's going to be the message sent to the Russians. Now, the Russians have the Azov battalion. They've captured a bunch of those guys out of Mariupol and a couple other places that they've taken. I think the Russians are going to escalate that. They're going to say, you're going to put the person up for war crimes? Guess what? We're going to put these people up for war crime trials. We're going to put them up against if they've if the Ukrainians have ever shot a Russian and then they've been a non-combatant for whatever reason, let's say they're a medical person or whatever else, then we're going to put them up for war crime trials and we're going to shoot them. In which case the Ukrainians, and I wouldn't blame them, are going to say, well, if you shoot our guys, then we're going to execute your guys. And then, it just goes from there. And then all it's going to be is a bunch of executions for war crime trials. Now, I realize the International War Crimes Tribunal went down to Ukraine to assist in this situation, to judge this Russian 21-year-old. And I'm sure the young man is scared to death. And I'll tell you one thing: if I were him, I'd be saying, look, I know that I'm going to be in life imprisonment here, but I think I'm going to change my citizenship to Ukrainian because he will never go back to Russia. If he goes back to Russia, I don't think he's going to be met with a hero's welcome. These poor Russian soldiers, and I shouldn't say poor because they have done a lot of atrocities here, but most of them, and I'd say most of them, are there because they were told to be there. So they're told to be there. All of a sudden, they're captured. They're put in this war crimes trial. The guy committed. He said, "Look, I shot the guy." I mean, what? Look, if I were a soldier, I would sit there. Why would I deny this? I'd sit there and go, look, if the individual is in my line of fire, I'm going to shoot him. I'm trying to get the soldier. Person's blocking the way. I get out of the way or whatever else, and I'm going to shoot the person. This young man evidently put a gun to this guy's head and shot him. Now, I don't know what exactly the details are of this, but man, I'll tell you, this is bringing out some real hatred, and the Ukrainians never liked the Russians. They never liked them. I mean, and Sasha will go into the history, and the history. I mean, they've never been nicey neighbors. It's been a horrible coexistence between those two, and basically what's happening is, if they start shooting Azov Battalion in Russia, they start putting them up against the wall and executing them. Sasha, hey, you were a Soviet soldier. I have this funny feeling that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to put them on trial, and they're going to sit there and say guilty. They're going to put them up against the wall. They're going to shoot them, and they're going to televise the shootings. This is just not a good thing.
Yeah.
There's a distinction between a special operation, what Russia believes it conducts and wants to all world believe it, and the war, because the war has certain rules.
Yes.
Exchange of prisoners and many other things. Whereas special operation has no rules whatsoever.
No.
So they can just shoot and rape and just do anything what they want. They are not under conventions, Geneva Convention, I don't remember exactly, or agreements, international agreements. Russia is not part of it because of its special operation status. But speaking about imprisonment of people who came from the, for example, during Second World War, a lot of Russians who escaped from German prison camp and concentration camps, they were all thrown to Russian concentration camps. So there was not much difference.
Yeah.
I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people.
Well, they said they were deserters. They said, "Oh, you're a deserter. That's why you got caught." I was like, they said we were captured.
Confess, here is what's happened to me. I was taken prisoner of war. I was thrown into such and such concentration camp, and I had to spend time. I couldn't escape, but then eventually I was able to escape. And so on. No. You're enemy. You are infiltrated and indoctrinated by Germans, and now you are a German spy. So you came back to spy for Germans on us. So we are going to put you to concentration camp. From there will be no escape for you, and you will be just stay there for the next 25 years or so. That's what's happening all over and over. Look, I think it's time. It's time for us to stop being rational, nice, explaining that the Russia is a great grain basket or so on. Really, what Russia is today is a fascist country with the Führer in the top of it. It's really a fascist country. There is no other interpretation today of what Russia is. It is clearly fascist country. It's a fascist government. It's a fascist leader. Everything about Russia is right there.
Go ahead.
That makes a lot of sense and everything. And I don't know. Yeah, I was telling Chris earlier that I know that earlier today, Putin was trying to do some political deflecting because he was trying to say that the West was blaming him for everything, including some of their own problems and all along those lines. So as I was telling Chris about this encounter that he had with the Belarusian president, it sounds like that he was doing some serious deflecting and basically saying, hey, West, you're having your own problems with your own infrastructure and things of that nature. So do you think that those kind of strategies will work at all in the West? And do you think that people like France and definitely England and even America will care that Mr. Putin is saying that he cannot be the boogeyman, because that's what he's basically trying to do. Is he's trying to say that he does not want to take the role of being the boogeyman, and we do know that sometimes within the context of the wars and the world in general, we oftentimes try to find somebody that is our moral enemy and all of that. And definitely, I would say that Putin has put himself in that position on his own free will and fruition and all of that. But I was just wondering your take on the West, whether they will even listen to anything he says as he tries to say, hey, hold on a minute. I got y'all's own problems. Yes, I know that I'm invading a country that is one of my, and it's my attempt to try to rebuild back the Soviet empire and everything, but y'all got y'all's own problems and I can't be blamed for all of them. I mean,
let me simplify for you, Mark. Let me simplify. It will be very easy for you to understand. Until September 1st, 1939, Hitler was a respectable politician, and there were different meetings and interaction between him and Western leaders and so on. Right. Now, once he invaded Poland and started Second World War, with the great assistance of Soviet Union, by the way, who invaded Poland from their end just a couple of weeks later, all niceties stopped right there. He is no longer a respected politician. He is an enemy that has to be dealt with one way or another. And that's exactly what's happened in the next 6 years or so. Putin, with all his rhetorics and all his killings and running around and poisoning his journalists and the politicians, so-called politicians, unfortunately, Putin stopped being a respectable leader from February 24th of this year. He is no longer who is worth talking to, discuss anything with. He has to be contained. I'm not talking about being killed or executed. Right? It's Russian people will decide what they're going to do with him. Let them do that. Right now, Russia has to be contained, made into giant North Korea, no interaction with the West in anywhere in economics, trade, culture, sport, just any activities. It's country that doesn't exist. And trust me, all Russian population, almost all, indoctrinated by Russian propaganda. They did fantastic job. They've done a fantastic job corrupting a lot of Western politicians in Europe and in the United States. Trust me. However, it will stop right there. There is no longer discussion, although there are still noises from Macron and a German leader, what's his name, and they say, you know what, it's better if Ukraine will not win outright, but let's be nice, and Putin will have some kind of an exit strategy, so he will save his face and all that stuff. When you listen to all these noises and you know how many people were murdered in Ukraine and maimed and raped, you can't talk like that. Are you not human beings? Are you not part of the Christian or Judean-Christian civilization when there are a certain way of behavior between human beings, and all that has been broken by the maniac, has to be contained, stopped, and that's the end of story. And Ukraine must be helped all the way. You're talking about $40 billion? No. It has to be $40 trillion. It has to be just as much money as there is in the world to deal severe blows to this maniac and get rid of the existential threat to world, to a Western society. And that's the only way, is to contain him. Otherwise, he will continue his expansion. He is already talking about invading probably next Moldavia and maybe some Baltic republics. Oh, they're members of NATO. Oh, Putin says, I forgot. Oh, really? They are. Okay, so maybe they have to denounce their membership. So NATO will not have to fight for them. Otherwise, it's not going to look pretty.
Yeah, sounds like it. Not at all. I want to get to some other things going on in the world as well. And one of them I want to ask Chris about because we've talked about it before, the whole power that Trump has in the political force and all of that. But apparently, his former vice president is in Georgia campaigning against him. So, there's a Trump-backed gubernatorial hopeful. And then apparently Mr. Pence is saying that he wants the other person to win in that sense and is campaigning against his former boss. Because like I said, he was the vice president to Mr. Trump and all of that. But what is your take on this political divide that might be going on between, so say, the moderate camp of the Republicans and those that are more in the Trump kind of camp as well? And what is your take on this part of the divide that seems to be going on here in the U.S.?
Well, I could tell you personally, Mark, I will not vote for any Republican primary candidates that are backed by Trump. I will not vote for any of them. If they're all backed, guess what? I'll vote for a Democrat. That sounds absolutely just counterintuitive, but I'm going to tell you right now, I will not vote for anybody that is that because you know what, I've heard their backgrounds. I've heard their background stories. You know what they say, and it's is all hyperbole. They talk about they're going to stop CRT. They're going to stop, the inflation. They're going to, bring down gas prices. Really, you're not going to do jack. You're going to walk in there and you're going to get, even the Republican leadership's going to say, sit down, shut up, learn, and then maybe, just maybe, you might get reelected. But in the meantime, you're going to, sit down and shut up. And it's interesting how they say, no, we're not going to do that. Well, guess what? If you're Trump backed and you go in there, you're going to split the party. If you're going to split the Republican Party, guess who wins? It's going to be the Democrats. They're going to walk in. They're just going to take over stuff. So it's going to be I think Trump, in his own egotistical, loudmouth manner, has now put the Republican Party on notice. You either go my way, or by God, I'm going to take my followers and I'm going to make a third party. And people are, I'm sorry, I don't mean to use the word stupid here, but I mean, maybe they're just ignorant. Maybe they're just nescient. Nescient is something you should know, but you don't know, something whatever it is. But I mean, it's like, or you don't know, but you don't know, is nescience. But ignorance is like, you should know this and you don't. This guy is going to go third party. He wants it all, and he wants to get back in the presidential seat to serve out his last 4 years. And then, then he's going to go off and he's going to, write about how he was so good at being able to get back in the presidential area. And I'll tell you something. I get scared about this guy. It's because if he's president again, what happens in Ukraine? Well, I mean, the whole reason, according to one source, the whole reason Putin didn't invade Ukraine is because he didn't know what the heck Trump was doing half the time. He'd ask him a question. He didn't know where Ukraine was. He had no idea what's going on, blah, blah. So he said, I'm going to wait till Biden's in charge, because Biden at least knows a little bit about international aspects, and maybe he'll be a little bit more kind to me from the standpoint of, understanding historical prospects. So Trump, anybody that's endorsed by Trump is out of my voting thing. And I hope to God it's out of every other Republican's voting deal. Do not elect people that are backed by Trump. We are in big trouble.
Hey, Sasha, do you have any, as one is over there in Canada and everything, but do you have any fear that if Trump was to come back into office and win a second term, that he might, because, he's had some very ambitious kind of things that he has said in the past, that one, he might try to form a third party, or if by some weird chance he was to be elected, he might try to become emperor for life in the U.S. I know we've never had one of those or anything along those lines, but as one watching from afar, what is your thoughts about this? And do you think that he might try to do some maneuvering to, have a lifetime seat?
Okay, speaking about Trump, what I think about Trump. It's a quasi-criminal who is highly dangerous for the United States of America. However, let's now talk about reality. Reality is that all politicians, they are striving for power. That's the only thing what they need. So it's not agenda of how to make America better or life of Americans better. Not at all. It's their existence in the political sphere ability to make hundreds of thousands of dollars, plus some people believe free parking at Washington airport. Okay, that's all what they care. Now, once you understand that, it's very convenient for people in the Republican circle, in all the senators and House people, members, and so on, to be for Trump. And you know why? Not because they love him. I don't think so. I think probably 90% of them hate him passionately. But Trump has a pretty good record of fundraising, number one.
Mhm.
And he still, and I think he's ambiguous about whether he will run or not, is to ability to keep his ability to raise more and more and more money. Okay. So now that thing alone attracts a lot of Republicans to be somehow associated with Trump, because maybe on a good day Trump will invite them for a hamburger with Coca-Cola, and so they will get some some goods out of their support of Trump. And how to break this machinery? It's not going to be easy. Mike Pence, he looks to be a credible person. He hasn't done much in the Trump administration because in a Trump, he's taking so much space with his Twitter, with his talks, with his public appearances, that Mike Pence didn't really have a chance to show what he's all about and so on. But looks to me that he's a decent man, and he could be. But anybody will be better than Trump, and Mike Pence is one of
No.
them.
Agreed.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. I'd love to hear both of your thoughts about this, because I really had not even heard about it, even though friends of mine had told me that it was out there, and I probably should have paid closer attention to everything. But, there is a new disease that is out there now as well, and definitely it has impacted one of the countries of the world. But earlier today, President Biden said Monday that he did not believe a quarantine to prevent the spread of monkeypox in the United States would be necessary, saying there are sufficient vaccine doses available to combat any serious flare-up of the disease. Belgium became the first country to impose a quarantine on its residents because of monkeypox, requiring those infected to isolate for 21 days. But in the United States, according to what Biden says, I just don't think it's rise to the level of the kind of concerns that existed with COVID-19, and the smallpox vaccine works for it. And that's what he said at a news conference he was having over there in Japan. So what is your thoughts about this other potential thing that is out there? The World Health Organization has identified monkeypox cases in at least a dozen countries in which the illness is not usually endemic. It is a disease that is generally found in Central and West Africa, although recently several European nations, as well as the United States, Australia, and Canada, have reported cases. So what are your thoughts? Is this something that we need to be concerned about, another disease that could be hitting us and that could be causing all kinds of problems? Like I said, the coronavirus pandemic, they say killed more than 1 million people in the United States alone. So I guess that there's some concern about what this one could do as well. You're in the data business, Chris. What's your thoughts?
Well, so monkeypox, evidently that the monkeypox was first reported in Belgium, and the Belgians still have colonies in West and Central Africa. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where this thing kind of hit into Europe aspect. But I think what they should do is they should get the CDC. The CDC reports on it pretty well, but they should see if the smallpox vaccination that we all had to have would help us fight the monkeypox, in the same way that it fights smallpox. Because basically, the regions of West and Central Africa had it really bad, and they showed some pictures of some kids that had it, right. And it's really, it's like a cross between smallpox and what's the other one? What's the other one? The one that the kids got, what was it called? I can't remember. But anyways, it's kind of like it's lesions basically on your skin. The way you get it is respiratory droplets, or you get it through some type of the lesions pop or whatever else, and then all of a sudden you have contact with that viral aspect. And the thing is to go to the source, right? Go to West and Central Africa and start to hit. First of all, quarantine that area, or get it to the point where you can isolate that, and then solve that problem, and then then you work on the exteriors. But it is funny, and the more I look at data, Mark, the more I agree with you. Is that we worry about Asia and we worry about Europe, but Africa is kind of like this. It'll fix itself. No big deal. It's okay. Hey, they're Africans. We're not going to worry about them. It's okay. Somalia will kind of be okay. Everybody will be all right. It's monkeypox. It's all in Africa. It's all in Africa. What do we care about? So it's
speaking of fixing ourselves and everything, there was a certain leader that when people were running for political office, they definitely said that they were a pariah. That was their words, not mine, and everything. And that they needed to be isolated. That was some of the leadership, including some of the royal leadership out of Saudi Arabia. But apparently they're now making overtures into the West and everything, and are definitely coming in here, having regular meetings with our officials and all of that. So what is your thoughts about maybe us looking at places like Saudi Arabia, even though we know that they treat their domestic dissidents harshly, and that they are definitely still in that destructive war with Yemen and all of that. And even though there is a ceasefire that is U.S. backed, that is currently in place. But I remember that campaign, and I definitely remember us talking about making them pariahs and all of that. But what is your thoughts about this other person that might have some kind of dictatorship kind of views and things along those lines, that in the past we've said that we didn't like what they were doing in their country and all along those lines. But now that we might need their oil and we might need some other things, we're at least open to overtures from them and all along those lines. So Chris and Sasha, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. As during the campaign trail, we said we were going to isolate them, and now it looks like we're saying, hey, come on in, let's have some conversations.
Well, go ahead, Sasha.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, so Saudi Arabia is extremely important to the United States strategic interests, and the reason is because the Saudis do not like the Iranians, right? So there's a difference in like one's Shia and one's Sunni, however that works, right? So they're not real big fans of Iran. So that it's like, okay, cool. So we're gonna get into Saudi Arabia and we're gonna put our bases there. We're gonna do whatever. And the Saudis then came to us and said, hey, we got some problems with Yemen. They're having some issues there. Well, when I was in East Africa, when I was stationed, when I had the duty in East Africa, we did operations against Yemen in Yemen, because literally it's right across the straits there. So just like boom, Gulf of Aden, you're right there in Yemen. So it's extremely important to us strategically. We give them jets. We give them, really high tech stuff. In fact, we trained, sad part, and I'll give you a personal story. One of the first young men that I ever commissioned in the Air Force, his name was Dan Swain. And Dan Swain was just exceptional person. He served time in the Iraq War and Desert Storm. He saved him and his flight lead. He was an F-16 driver. He did a lot of neat things. He saved a bunch of Green Berets. I mean, he got the Distinguished Flying Cross for that. I mean, he just did a lot of good things. He was teaching and from what I heard, now this may be apocryphal, but it's just a story that I heard. He was teaching a Saudi pilot, and basically the Saudi pilot crashed, and both of them were killed. And that's kind of a shame. I mean, he died doing what he liked, and that's good. But I take a look at that, and I go, I can remember people telling me that the Saudi pilot candidates were basically from the monarchy. They were, princes or whatever it was that came over, and they were told by their father or grandfather, whatever, you're going to be a fighter pilot. They were not good pilots, but the U.S. was like, okay, we'll go ahead and pass them, and we'll send them back over to Saudi Arabia, and they can be fighter pilots over there, which they were very rarely. They just kind of took the wings and used them as adornment. So that's what we were dealing with. So Saudi Arabia is our ally, good or bad, because of their state in the world, because of their location in the world. They really have a good way to get to different areas. So that's basically it. That's why we do what we do. And this is a monarchy now, Mark. This is king. This is a king there. There's been a king there forever. If you want to read a great book, read is it T.E. Lawrence? I think it is. That I can't remember if it's T.E. or it's something. E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, who did an entire book on that whole area about all the different tribes and all the different aspects that go along with that. Yeah. So that's my take on it.
What's your take, Sasha?
Well, sometimes it's situations that you have to choose between two evils, and as much as you can be critical about the Saudi Arabia treatment of its own citizens and killings or whatever they did and so on, but in this situation, the economical situation requires very quickly to replace Russian oil and gas, and from that point on, Saudi Arabian oil is just as good as any, probably even better. And to increase production, of course, in Iran and Venezuela, who are not greatest friends of United States, but there is a great difference. Russia also is not a great friend of the United States, but at least neither Venezuela or Iran have the capabilities and willingness and resolve to destroy United States. Russia has everything. It has will, it has capacity, and therefore to remove Russia from the world trade, economy, culture, sport, and everywhere is a way of dealing with existential threat, and just to keep them away, let them to kill and rape their own citizen, and just keep them completely at bay. And for that, the oil and gas reserves, of course, needed. And U.S., in my opinion, has to increase to their own domestic oil and gas production as much as they can.
Well, I agree with you, Sasha. I mean, Russia should be isolated, right? But the problem is you got the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, whatever you call it. I mean, you got India in there, you got Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, all these stans, right, that are in there, Uzbekistan, and they're daggum well that they're providing Russia with stuff. So the only way we're going to really end up doing that is to tell Uzbekistan and the rest of the stans, hey, look, you have to stop. If you don't stop, then we're going to start putting sanctions on you. And we're going to start doing whatever we need to do with you. But we haven't gone that far. Because,
Yeah, but all the stances, they're backward society.
They are backward.
They're definitely back there and everything. But there is a major country that is actually had a change in political leadership. And I'm hoping that he will come on later on this week and give us some insight on what is going on in Australia, that being Shaquille, because after almost a decade of conservative leadership, Australian voters said that they were going to go in a different direction. They did not like their current ruling coalition. And to something that you brought up earlier and everything, as I'm reading about this, it seems like some of the things that have actually impacted even other elections in the West were impacting those elections as well, because apparently those that were winning were dealing with issues like climate change, greater gender equality, and what they are saying is political integrity. So those all sound like issues that we've heard right here in the U.S. as well. So definitely it looks like they are trying to come in from the climate cold, and it definitely sounds like a lot of the campaign had to do with climate issues in that area and all along that line. As a matter of fact, the CEO of the Climate Council said millions of Australians have put climate first. Now it's time for a radical reset on how this great nation of ours acts upon the climate challenge. So definitely Australia has long been known as the lucky country, partly due to its wealth of coal and gas, as well as minerals like iron ore, which have driven generations of economic growth. But I guess that folks are saying, hey, we need a change in pace. And I'm definitely curious to hear what Shaquille has to say, because apparently the women there as well wanted to be heard as also. So it does seem like that might have played some facts into what were going on. And apparently their past prime minister, Mr. Morrison, had some cases of sexual scandals and things along those lines. So that might have got the women's vote out also. But what have you heard, either one of you two, about what was going on there? And apparently, by the way, the indigenous vote was also very much amplified in that area as well. And we oftentimes don't hear as much as we would like to, at least in my mind, about the Aborigines and the indigenous folks there in Australia. But like I said, hopefully we'll hear from Shaquille sometime this week and we can get his insight as one that is there. But as one like myself looking from the inside out, what are your thoughts about what just happened in Australia?
I'll tell you, Australia is really big, like you say, on minerals and different aspects. And I'll tell you, when my father worked for the Aluminum Company of America, that's when in the 1970s, basically, he used to take a trip to Australia. And the reason he took the trip to Australia was because they had the ability to really produce a lot of aluminum. They were a major aluminum producer. So Alcoa decided they were going to partner with Australia and do a lot of manufacturing there in Australia and bring aluminum from Australia to the United States. So there was a lot of dependency on aluminum from Australia, and like you say, steel, different aspects of just a lot of different things that they could do in Australia that we just couldn't do here in the United States as well. So that's they have a lot of basic manufacturing and raw materials that they can use. Of course, they also have the most poisonous snake in the world and whatever else. So I mean, it's a mixed bag there in Australia, but I would love to hear what Shaquille has to say about the new regime going in there.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what he's got to say about that as well. And it looks like indigenous groups across Australia are calling for the Constitution to be changed so they can be formally consolidated on legislations and policies affecting their communities. But that's going to require a national referendum. And the last time Australia voted in a referendum on Aboriginal rights was in 1967, when 90% of the country supported a move to include indigenous people in their census. So that's a long time ago. So definitely it'll be interesting to see what happens in that regards as well, and whether that actually gets approved or not. As we get ready to wind down, and I know the other thing that I was going to bring up was the gun shootings that take place. And we had another one recently, this one in New York. So a man died after he was shot on a New York City subway train just 1 month after 10 people were shot, and even more were injured on a subway train. So New York Police Chief of the department, Kenneth Corey, said at a news conference the police were called to the Canal Street train station and responded to reports that a person had been shot and all of those lines. But we're seeing, like, whether it's Buffalo, whether it's this incident in the subway, and definitely I could even pull up others as well, that more and more folks are carrying guns, and therefore sometimes using these guns in very harmful ways in very public places and all of that. So do you think that these kind of incidences, and I'd love to hear both of your thoughts, are going to bring the whole gun issue to the forefront and get more people involved in trying to regulate what kind of guns people can have? Or will people just be seeing this as another incident of a criminal doing what criminals do, which is basically committing crimes and all of that? Or do you think that these kind of incidences, whether it's Buffalo or whether this incident on the subway, will continue the discussion around gun control?
So let me comment for a second. I think we talk about mass shootings. So I looked up mass shootings, and the FBI, everybody has these definitions of mass shootings. Mass shooting is basically the common definition of a mass shooting is the killing of more than 3 people. Killing more than 3 people, that's considered a mass shooting. So not all gang shootings, but gang shootings, whether it be New York or LA or whatever else, it's considered a mass shooting. So, where are the guns? Who gets these guns? Well, the bad people get these guns. How do they get the guns? Through illegal sales. So basically, they're going to say, well, let's have gun control. So, hey, look, I just talked to a guy who was openly carrying a Glock, and I said, I just need to understand how many rounds do you carry? He says 18 rounds. I said 18 rounds. He says, yeah, 17 in the clip, 1 in the chamber. 18 rounds. What are you going to do with 18? If somebody attacks you, you're going to shoot them 18 times. I mean, you're just going to shoot everything, right? I mean, 18. So I'm sitting back going, why would I carry a weapon that has 18 rounds? There's no reason. The AR-15s, all that stuff. Hey, if you want to be a collector of an AR-15, I have no problem with that whatsoever. Here's what you do. I'm going to put concrete in the barrel. Now you can have your AR-15. You can put it up. You can do whatever you want. You want to fire an AR-15? Here's what you go. You go to a shooting range, which has a licensed AR-15. You can fire as many rounds as you want. But guess what? That AR-15 stays at that range. And you go home and you can look at your AR-15 with the concrete in there, and you can just sit there and say, I'm a collector. And that's fine with me. But there's no reason. I have 2 hunting rifles that are hunting rifles. They're not AR-15s. They're not some automatic weapon that you don't need to have an automatic weapon. So these areas, Mark, what you're talking about is, Congress is going to sit there and they're going to waste a lot of time. Oh, we got to put this gun control in there. You know that's going to hurt? The legal gun owners, the people that registered the gun and did whatever. The illegal people are going to sit there and laugh at that and go, I don't care. I still have, whomever, down the street who will sell me whatever I want. And all the registration is going to be gone, and I can use this for whatever crime I want to use it for. Criminals will use criminal guns. Enough of this bull crap. Let's figure out how to get the illegal guns off the street. They've tried different things. And, I don't know what the solution to that is, but I can tell you what the solution of AR-15s is you say you can own whatever gun you want. But let me tell you something. If it's beyond 6 rounds, in other words, you can have a gun that has 6 rounds. Any more than that, that's considered to be something you can't have. And I know gun control people are going to go nuts with that. When they watch this, they're going to sit there and say, "This guy Greco, man, he's nuts."
But see, Chris, here's been my empirical evidence with people with guns. The people that are military. When I used to own, a lot of semi-automatic weapons, 44s, 22s, 30s. The only people who knew how to handle them, because people came to our lake place, we had 10 acres. The only people who knew how to handle them were military and ex-military. The yahoos who said they knew how to handle a gun did not know how to handle a gun at all.
Right.
And so I wouldn't let a person who's not military, if they hadn't served service, I wouldn't let them have a gun, period, because they don't know even how to handle a gun. I'm serious, Chris.
Yeah.
And I watched how they handle it. So the thing is, if you're ex-military, you should be able to get a license to do it. Well, now what it also does encourage, which we're going to go into our next show about, is people to join the military, because David Walker is saying people should be required to have service. And there's a good reason for it, because they learn so much, because they're so uneducated, these yahoos around here. Now, here's some good news. The reason I was gone. Tomorrow, Russia, China, Ukraine, where this is a milestone, will be live broadcast on Roku for the first time. And you have to realize people don't know how hard it is. If you go look at all our competitors, you'll notice they do not do live broadcasting on Roku. It's all on demand. So if this takes off, it's like a weapon. Kaboom! The beta test is Sasha's show.
Don't forget links, please.
Yeah, don't forget. Yeah, good question. I bet. Yeah,
Sasha's excited. I don't blame him and everything along those lines.
I haven't seen the link on it. I think the link was made. I don't know. I'm gonna have to check with the people that are doing it, because it's going to be live broadcast on Roku if this missile takes off. And
do you have somebody, Nick? Do you have somebody available to work on Intra? Intra.
I should be there tomorrow for Russia, China, Ukraine.
No, I'm talking about redo Intra to the show. It's very generic and much lower quality. Okay. What I'll do is I'll put together. I gotta go. We have 11 o'clock.
You got 11 o'clock. It's time to get on out of here and everything. So I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and we'll be back with definitely, hopefully, Steve on tomorrow, and definitely, hopefully, Chris and Sasha will be joining me here as well. But I thought we had a good discussion, talked about a lot of things. The only thing we didn't get to was the other parts of the world that also had elections in May, and maybe we'll cover those on tomorrow. And those include Colombia and Lebanon. We did mention Australia, and of course, in the past, we've talked about the Philippines. But on that note, we're going to get on out of here watching these folks skedaddling around the world and all of that. And we'll be back on this show on tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And I know that I'll be joining the media show at 12 o'clock. And definitely, I think that there's some other shows that folks will want to catch as well. So keep your radios and your TVs locked in right here, and we'll have some more great programs, including that great show that will be appearing on Roku, apparently for the first time ever live and all of that, even though it's appeared on Roku in the past. So I saw that big smile that Sasha had, and I know he's looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it as well. So let's get on out of here, Sasha, and we'll catch them on the flip side.